Hey,
Hello, hello. Good to see you again.
yeah, how are you going?
Very good, especially now seeing that we have a brand new intro. I kind of think it's cool. I kind of think it's likable. So, people, if you like it as well, press the like button.
I don't think anybody was there to watch the
Oh
intro.
no! Well, we'll replay. I mean, there's going to be plenty of replays, so no worries. We're gonna be
Yeah.
showing it on our next episode. How are
Yeah,
you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. So, welcome everyone. I see we have one viewer.
Hmm.
We had three. Hi, whoever you are. Yeah, welcome to our conversation for change, where Anya and I really meet and talk with some incredible thinkers and academics from all over the world. Yeah, it's been good. Thanks for all of you who've been liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel. That's really cool. I think we have Anya like close to 5,000 followers. We're not at 5,000 yet, but it's
That's crazy.
4,850 something followers. So, guys, this helps us, in terms of the work we're trying to do. So, please like and subscribe to YouTube and on Facebook Collaborative so that you can be notified when we're coming on and stuff. Yeah.
And if you miss any of the episodes, or if you're, willing to dig deeper into these with us, we do have masterclasses and all the recordings, plus the recordings, all the content, the multimedia content that we are having from the summit and all the recordings from the previous years. It's all on Flix. So fli-x.com. We're having and providing you with the experience of the Future Law Institute. So yeah, join us. You're gonna get everything there. There's masterclasses. There's the play shops that we had during the summit. There's all the conversations that we have filmed. So over 100 hours for sure. Fun guaranteed, I promise. So do let us know if you have any troubles signing into that platform. But Flix and YouTube, those are pretty awesome.
Yeah, and today we want to profile a bit of a conversation we had with Jeremy Lent, who is a renowned author of The Patterning Instinct, and also The New Possible was just published. And coming up, he has another one, The Web of Meaning, which is going to be really exciting to see. We're going to show a bit of that because Anya and I sat down with him a few days ago, um, and we just let the conversation go. The
Mhm.
conversation was for over an hour, but we thought, oh gosh, we're not going to come and share that whole thing with you here today. We thought we'd give you a snippet. But before we do that, Anya, I was just thinking, so we have so many new subscribers on YouTube. Um, and I'm not sure they all know who we are and what we're doing and why
Mm.
we are doing this, why we're
Mhm.
having these conversations. Like today is Saturday. It's actually a beautiful day for me in the UK. I could be out playing with my kid, in the
That's right. Yeah.
park,
And look
and
at
I'm
us
not.
sitting in here.
Yeah, we're in here. You could be out with your friends having a blast, but we're here. Why are we here doing this? Right?
So we are devoted to our values that we cherish the most. But yeah, I mean, it's what brought us together in the first place, right?
Yeah. So we thought just before we share the snippet of the conversation, we share a little bit with you guys about who we are and why we're doing what we're doing and what really drives us to do these videos and to create this content for you. So I'm Margaret, that's
And
Anya,
hello, hello.
and we're both lawyers. And interesting, I am from the Caribbean, and I am the young one. I always like to say, haha, that's a joke. And Anya is from Europe. She's from Slovenia. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. And we're from different generations, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different geographies. And we were able to connect on a shared passion for, like, wait a minute, our legal system is lagging behind the
Hmm.
massive changes that are taking place worldwide. And there needs to be a lot of transformation at the law and policy level if we want to see, the new shift, the new world that we're all trying to create, the safer, more just, more ecologically resilient future. And for those of you who are plugging in and listening to us and thinking, what new world? We don't need a new world. Well, that's fine. we are not really,
Pushing with that,
yeah, we're not trying to force you into this, but there are a lot of people who feel that a shift is taking place and they want to show up more powerfully. They want to contribute to the shift that is taking place to a more inclusive and integrated society that understands that, we are all in one interconnected system and interdependent system. So if you're one of those, I mean, that's where Anya and I connected, and it was so much more than what made us different. And so that's in 2017, right? At the Global
yeah.
Challenges Retreat. And we have been since 2017 talking with colleagues, talking with experts, just trying to figure out, how we can channel this shared passion, because we felt if Anya had it and I had it, many more people, and the more people we spoke to, we recognized they also had it. And so, yeah, that's where Future Law Institute came out. Hi, Mogadishu.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, talk to us, because sometimes we feel like we're talking to ourselves,
But it really was. I mean, 3 years ago, you brought together people from all different backgrounds, not only countries. It was really amazing to see people coming from the UN, people coming from corporates, people coming from marketing agencies, people coming from the politics. And we all were struggling with just how the law really functions today, how these systems are being built, and whether we have actually, grown up. And perhaps should we actually name these systems obsolete already, or what is it exactly that is happening? And then when the pandemic hit us, it actually just became clear that all the struggles, all the lags that we were previously talking about, these were now being exposed like twice. I mean, one thing is that the system was already struggling before, but then when pandemic hit, it just broke apart. And this is something that we don't really wish to let go. Like, I kind of have a feeling that a lot of people today are just, fed up with the whole system, fed up with the pandemic. Everybody just wants to move on and go back to their normal lives. But there is no normal. Just last year, we were actually talking about it's not about going back to the normal. The normal was obviously not functioning well for us. And this is why the system is now disintegrating. So let's not move away from that thought. Let's cling on just for a bit more. And let's reiterate it. Let's, bring it up more often, because this is something that we should be addressing years ago, and we didn't. So let's bring it up now, yet again.
Yeah, and I'm seeing Willow. Hi, Willow, saying struggling to get sexual offenses bill in Somalia, where rape of women and children is a pandemic. Exactly. This was happening before the COVID-19 pandemic. And, I really commend the work you are trying to do, Willow. And that really connects with what we are trying to do in the Future Law Institute. And for those of you listening, the Future Law Institute is built. We have developed this. We've established this with the experts that we have and are bringing in from all over the world to help empower you wherever you are, the professional, whatever industry you are in. It is not just lawyers, but wherever you are, we are trying to empower you to increase your sphere of influence to create policy change in your jurisdiction. So if you are passionate like Willow about sexual offenses, the sexual offenses bill in Somalia, we want to help you build your policy entrepreneurship, those skills that are so required for us to show up more powerfully in our democratic system. People are saying our democracy is failing, it's not working, and all of that. And I agree with that assessment. But I think even within our democratic systems, as they are politically polarized, as they're hijacked by financiers and all of that, we have all of that. But I think there's still an opportunity for us as citizens and professionals to show up far more powerfully than we've been showing up before. And protest, in my view, is not the highest form of how we can interface in a democratic system. Of course, in really oppressive societies, protest may be the only route that you have. And I honor protest in any situation where it's analyzed that it's the appropriate thing to do, but there are so many other things that we can do from a policy entrepreneurship and policy advocacy standpoint. And that's why we're here, guys. That's why the Future Law Institute exists.
And another thing that I do want to bring up, Willow, we're going to be creating this program for policy entrepreneurship. So stay tuned and subscribe to all our newsletters, because we're going to be informing our collaborative about this program quite soon. But I mean, yeah, that's definitely something that we're looking into. And what we figured out is that these types of things, we are struggling on so many different areas. It's not just the sexual offenses. It's not just about how do we deal, for example, with the public procurement within the pandemic. How do we actually craft better model laws for procurement in crisis, the times of crisis? It's everywhere. We even struggled with how, for example, to track the technological advancement. It's been progressing so fast that you don't even know what to propose to your government. And with sexual abuses, I do believe that there is plenty different interest on the other side as well that are being vocal and that you have to tackle as well. So we would be interested in learning more about what you do. Join us on the WhatsApp group as well, because we're going to have a lot of conversations there. There is plenty of information being exchanged in the group. So yeah, please stay tuned, because this looks quite an interesting topic.
And our first meeting of the year of our collaborative will be before the end of March. So join our WhatsApp group, stay tuned with these conversations, and plug in with the whole community. Hopefully before the end of March, we're going to bring everybody together and, set a sort of agenda for the issues we are dealing with in 2021, 2022. And Anja, we should send the link. We should put the link there so that people can join. But another thing that we are doing, which brings us to what we are doing today, is we are really passionate about. Willow, don't put your number there. Take your number off. We'll just give you the link to add yourself. Yeah, for your own safety. Just don't want to leave that out there. But one of the things we are trying to do is elevate. Anja and I are actually curating some of the most profound thinkers and academics and who've written books and that are pointing us to how we can create this shift, how we can build the conditions for the new future that we are trying to create. And so last year, we brought together 129 of these leading thinkers and academics at the summit, and we are continuing to profile them in our Conversations for Change and on our Flix.com channel, where you will be able to learn and get stimulated by these new thinkers. And that's what we're doing today. We're not going to share the full conversation of Jeremy Lent, who is amazing, who's giving us a lot of guidance and mentorship right now as well. Since we've met him and profiled his work, we've really connected on a deep level. And our conversation was so long, we're not going to share that all with you. It's profound insights.
We do love him. I mean, he's full of all these patterns. He embodies what he writes, right? When you speak about numerous things that might not really be up his alley, or he might not really be the expert on, he's just going to be literally seeing the patterns and then just bringing you up to date with those patterns. It's incredible to speak to him every single time we did that. And I hope that we're going to be having even more conversations with him, and there is probably going to be even new books that we can promote. So all good.
And masterclasses and all of that with Jeremy Lent. He's an incredible thinker, guys. And so he actually coined the phrase, cognitive history, tracing the history of mankind, humanity's history through their ideas, their shared ideas and values and culture. And it's a fascinating read to check that out. So we're going to play this conversation that has been beautifully edited and produced into a podcast by our teammate, the amazing Adam Bates. And so we share that with you now. Conversation for Change with Jeremy Lent and Adam Bates doing his thing.
I do agree that the nation state system is moving into the past. The question is, what takes over that power?
This is the Future Law Institute podcast.
How do we ensure that algorithms deliver justice think stock exchange ownership of companies in the way we've got it is incompatible with life on Earth.
Small states, you are the new. Your voice must be heard.
This is Negotiating the New Normal with Adam Bates.
Today, we're going to be focusing on how we see the future of the world. And I'm going to start by sharing two examples of extraordinary humans who successfully dared to imagine how things that had always been could be different. You probably haven't heard of either. The first is Quan Wan, a pediatrician in the Ming dynasty. He was the first to document acting on an outrageous idea that turned out to be miraculous. Smallpox was causing widespread misery. In a 1549 medical text, he detailed how he'd found a way to prevent severe symptoms and even death. He blew powdered smallpox scabs up the noses of healthy children. As a result, their survival rate from the disease was around 25 to 30 times higher. It's the first known example of something we're depending on now, inoculation. The second is the remarkable instructor and lifelong companion of Helen Keller. Her name was Anne Sullivan. Helen Keller had lost her sight and hearing before her second birthday. This is back in the late 19th century. When she was 7, her parents hired Anne Sullivan as a teacher to their child who struggled to communicate in any meaningful way. While nobody else had much of an idea what could be done and no precedent to be guided by, Anne Sullivan showed astonishing creativity and patience to find a way to give her student a voice.
She had observed that we did not use the hands when we were talking to each other. And I let her see, by putting her hand on my face, how we talk with our mouths. After her 7th lesson, she was able to speak the sentence word by word. I am not dumb now.
Helen went on to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree from Radcliffe College of Harvard University, and together with Anne, travelled the world campaigning for the rights of deaf and blind people. Sullivan's ingenuity and persistence changed public perceptions around the capabilities of people with disabilities. So what about Quan Wan and Anne Sullivan? These changemakers looked at the problem before them and imagined the unimaginable. They helped transform perceptions of disease treatment and disability, respectively. Now think about us. The transformation we need is bigger than any humanity has ever undertaken. Our planet, on its current trajectory, is heading for catastrophic ecological disaster, and we all know how easy it is to be bogged down in gloom about that. But today's episode features Jeremy Lent, who calls on us to open ourselves to new ways of thinking about what's possible, just like Quan and Sullivan. Because in his view, no less than transforming the basis of our global civilization will suffice. Jeremy has crystallized a vision of a civilization that moves away from the accumulation of wealth and instead towards an ecological civilization, learning from the wisdom of nature about how we organize ourselves. I've got an eye-opening conversation to bring you about that. Just before I do, you may have been one of the people involved in the Blockchain and Crypto Future Law Institute masterclass we previewed in the last episode with expert Anja Bly. Now, we appreciate all the positive feedback and thanks coming from all over the world, including from Andre, who said he took away with him a broad vision on blockchain regulation and problems arising from the theme, and Harry, who said the masterclass was flawless and easy to understand and digest. If you weren't there, you don't want to keep missing these. The next Future Law Masterclass is also focused on technology, but in a different way. It's called Designing for Algorithmic Justice and will be led by renowned AI ethicist Renee Cummings. The next episode will be with Renee. It's a fascinating topic that explores, for example, how AI is currently reinforcing prejudices and imbalances in the justice system and what we need to do about it. That will be on Saturday, 20th of March. Go to masterclass.futurelaw.io to read more about that and book your space. And the link for that is also in the episode notes. So back to revolutionizing the basis of our civilization then. Jeremy Lent is a leading thinker who's investigated the underlying patterns of thought that have led our civilization to its current crisis of sustainability. He's the author of The Patterning Instinct, A Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning, and is also the co-author of a new book called The New Possible, which offers hope and visions of a world beyond crisis. It also has a really nice multicolored cover, just so you know. His essay in the book is titled Envisioning an Ecological Civilization, and he begins here by telling Future Law founders Anja Bly and Margaret Rose Goddard what that means.
The idea of an ecological civilization, in simple terms, is to envisage what our society, our human society, could be like if we actually looked at some of nature's own principles that allowed nature to develop ecosystems, ecologies that can last in health and resilience for millions and millions of years, and through all kinds of perturbations, with the exception maybe of human impact right now, unfortunately. But we evolved over billions of years on Earth certain kind of secrets to how to interact. And so the inspiration is, what happens if we look at nature's own secrets and try to apply them to our own society? And something I love about an ecological civilization is it gets away from some of these past dichotomies that have gotten so stale. You know, we can look at the whole 20th century really politically as being all about sort of capitalism versus communism or socialism. And so it's always right versus left, or free market versus the collective, and all these kind of things. And it's every time people come up with new ideas, it's so easy to get pigeonholed, and you're back in the same old arguments. And people say, well, look what happened with Soviet Union. That didn't go so well. All that stuff. The lovely thing about this vision of an ecological civilization, and so much work that is being done by people around the world in different areas, is that it leaves behind that old divide. There were just as many bad things about communism as there have been about capitalism, and there's good things about both. And what an ecological civilization does is says, let's start again, looking at what actually could work for humanity. And so an example of the kind of secrets that nature has that we're talking about, probably the most important of all, is this notion of mutually beneficial symbiosis. You know, we've been told by people like Richard Dawkins and a lot of the contemporary ideas that we, as sort of pseudoscience, if you will, because modern biology has shown these to be incorrect. But people have got to think that nature is all about competitiveness and selfish genes, and every creature is out to get at the other creature. And even when they're cooperative, it's just because they're just using it as a tactic, because ultimately it's all about selfish genes. Actually, what evolutionary biology shows us is that the great steps in evolution from when life first began on Earth have all been about different organisms working out how to be mutually beneficially symbiotic with others, where each is a specialist at one particular thing, and then they work together to create a whole that is more successful, richer than they could ever be as separate parts. And so that's what we can learn for human society.
Does that suggest that we actually have a really good shared understanding of what are the resources that we are, having, the shared resources? Because when you say symbiosis, that means that if we are part of the same system, that means that I use it, but not on behalf of you, or not as in a way that would actually harm you. But we really know, and we share the information, just how much resources there is that I can spend and how much resources I need to share with you. Is that a demand that, or almost like a predisposition that we make, an assumption that we make when we say that we are, sharing the same ecosystem, sharing the same planet, and that we can actually live as the ecological civilization?
Yeah, I think part of it is clearly to recognize that we're in a system which is basically based on exploitation. Mm-hmm. And so the system is, from a global scenario, the system is all about what capitalism basically says is, how can we exploit natural resources as rapidly as possible? And people who have the capital, this is the underlying basis of the system, the people who have the capital try to use their capital to exploit other human beings as effectively as possible to make more money on their capital. And so everything is structured as this balance within this kind of zero-sum game. And so if you're somebody who doesn't have the capital, then the only way you can be a part of the system is by selling your own lifeblood, essentially, your own energy and time, in order to be able to eat or have housing, because the system is designed that way. And similarly with in terms of looking at the rest of the living earth, it's viewed as a resource. Like, how can we mine resources as quickly as possible? How can we turn natural abundance into stuff that can be part of that market economy? So what the notion of an ecological civilization is about shifting the whole way we're looking at human relationships and the whole way we look at human relationships with the living earth. So if we relate to how we are with Earth symbiotically, it would be not about how can we exploit it as much as possible, but how can we get what nature is contributing to us? How can we receive that in a way that actually allows nature to also flourish? And by the way, it'll enable that to contribute more to us in the future. So it's kind of a win-win. It turns that zero-sum game into a win-win. And similarly in human society, rather than being capital versus labor, it moves more towards things like worker-owned co-ops, or even more profoundly towards commons as a form of organizing, so that people actually are part of their very ownership structure. And it's like being part of the community and forces people and enables them to be responsible for how the resources get shared and to make sure they're there for the long term.
You know, Jeremy, these conversations are happening all over the world. We are seeing, you know, more and more organizations, communities, thought leaders like yourself, writing, sharing, having these discussions about how we can create a better future. And actually doing initiatives, creating initiatives. They're also entrepreneurs and social leaders who are creating initiatives. But I mean, the elephant in the room, I think, is our political governance systems and our political leadership. And the question is, can we from the bottom up create these changes if our political leaders don't get on board with the shifts that the vast majority of people are starting to see that we need to do? I mean, what are nature's secrets for our democracy? What are nature's secrets for our political system?
Well, yeah, I think that you are definitely looking at the right thing there in terms of that elephant in the room. I would just maybe suggest rephrasing it slightly in terms of like more like power dynamics, because it's even goes beyond politics in the sense that another, even maybe in my view, even more gigantic elephant in the room is the power of the transnational corporations, oftentimes when we think about politics, we think about party politics or whatever, and we miss the fact that the actual power behind most of what goes on are these massive for-profit corporations. Right. And in fact, if you look at the 100 largest economies in the world today, most of them are not even countries. 69 of those 100 are transnational corporations. They're the ones that basically drive the discussions with the UN. They own our media. So they control what we think. They own all kinds of everything around finance. So sources of capital to do anything they own.
And they buy policies.
And they buy policies, exactly. So really, so politics, yes, but it's more like those power dynamics. And party politics we think of as just kind of one more puppet within that overall power dynamic. But it comes back to your question. What do we do about that if it's so powerful? And I think the first thing we need to do, honestly, is just be aware of the elephant in the room, in the sense that it's so powerful and it's so massive that much of the time we spend just sort of not even looking at that because it's just too big. And we look at, well, how can we work within this system to make it a little bit better? And oftentimes people will say, well, how can we try to make the corporation a little bit more humane or get them to do more good things? But if you're a corporation and you're driven by having to maximize shareholder profits at all costs, that basically, the irony is that in the United States, corporations are called persons, and they have the legal power and privilege of persons. But if they were human persons, they would be psychopaths. Because a psychopath is somebody who is only concerned about one thing, their own goal, and they have no empathic, no compassion, no morality about whatever happens in order to get that goal. And that is what a corporation basically in its DNA is about. So we have to recognize that. And that's rarely talked about, partly because the corporations themselves own the distribution of information too.
Wait, but I'm just going to slightly challenge that, because I am aware of the neo-corporativism, and it's not the first time that we've actually came across this notion. The corporations sure are now biggest than ever, and it's, to my view, actually absurd to know that the World Health Organization is actually in the hands of Bill Gates, for example. So it is becoming very interesting to observe all these new power dynamics, but to some extent, can't we believe that perhaps whomever holds the power in their hands when it comes to the global perspective, maybe it's the notion of the nation states that is kind of becoming obsolete, just like the monarchs have become obsolete in the 17th century, and it's now about to radically change the game. So maybe it's going to be up to the corporations to become responsible for our social wealth.
I do agree that the nation state system is moving into the past. It's really not how our future could or should be structured, basically. They were, as you say, just really the result of power politics in Europe over a few hundred years. It's not like the natural way in which society should be structured in any respect. And I do think they've been weakening. The question is what takes over that power? And many people actually look at cities as being the source of much more of the sort of people-driven power as we move forward. That's where, like by the middle of this century, I think 70%. That's very much where we find a lot of the ideas that are much more grassroots oriented, because somebody who's like the mayor of a city, for example, you're dealing with the hardcore reality on the ground of people's lives, what they're actually going through. So you're much closer to the lived reality rather than this kind of idea of a nation state. But to your other point, looking at corporations, they're not going to be going away anytime soon. And there may even be a very significant role for these gigantic, big transnational corporations of some kind in any kind of future. Because if we think again about nature as an ecosystem, there are some species that are very huge and loom big in the system. Some species are niche. You have elephants and you have tiny little dung beetles and everything in between. So it's not like everything should be one size fits all. So I think to your point is, the hopeful thing is we can actually change the DNA of these corporations. If we, I'm sure people are probably familiar with this notion of what are called B corporations. And there's another thing as a certification for a benefit corporation. And the notion behind those is that to change the actual charter of a corporation, to say it has to be focused not just on profit, but also sometimes called triple bottom line, not just profit, but people and planet. Now, right now, that's had almost infinitesimal impact on the world, because any large corporation has simply not chosen this voluntary shift towards that triple bottom line. But just imagine if it became, if the nations as a group, some of the largest nations agreed that they were changing the corporate charter rules so the corporations could only keep being chartered if they actually met those triple bottom lines. And if the decision about whether they did or not was made not by just some corrupt panel of like ex-corporate sort of executives who were just hanging together, but actually through sortition, through people, actual workers or people who lived in communities where those corporations were, or people who lived on the land where corporations were expresses, as a group had to determine whether they actually were meeting those bottom lines, and therefore whether they could even allow to be continuing to be in business. That one change, which is a massive change, but also it's a change that's very imaginable. It just requires lines of text in law, basically. that would change the DNA of those corporations overnight.
Sure. And so that is what we in future law would call a high leverage strategic intervention point in the law. But then you buck up against the point that I raised before, the political system, the process by which policies become law, and the obstacles in that process. And at the end of the day, the relationship between the political leadership and lawmaking is something that we cannot avoid. So I think for me, once we continue focusing on voluntary self-regulation, while for these corporations and in these industries, whilst it's good and I support it and I think we really should do it, I don't know if it's going to get us there fast enough, given the imperatives that are upon us right now with the IPCC reports and all that we're seeing with the climate and the human rights injustices and the oppression and the structural inequalities that exist right now. I don't know if we can go fast enough relying on voluntary self-regulation. Yeah, Anja. Wait. So let's jump back in right there.
I mean, I gotta say, because before I was laughing so hard, I heard myself saying that the monarchs were obsolete already in 17th century, and I was shit, that was not what I actually meant. I mean, you can see how complex the whole system has become, the political system especially, and how diplomacy, for example, is now looking like. It's not as if we don't really have the monarchs any longer, do we?
Yeah, but the power that they used to wield, I think your point was correct, though, that, the power at the monarchy level, it's not the same as it was.
Yeah.
It
Totally.
evolved. Yeah. And I think you agree with that. With transnational corporations, they are wielding a lot of power in society right now as well. And
yeah, absolutely. I actually think that it's a bit ignorant from us. Like Margaret Heffernan said it, the willful ignorance. Just pretending that these corporations are just the lobbies, or that they're affecting the lobbies, and this is how they influence the policy on the other side. It's not really like that. We should actually start pretending that it's just a lobby. It's basically those are the decision makers that now have a huge power on a global level. And I think that we should stop pretending that that's not the case, that the nation states are still the ones that are having the final words. Sure, they do, because there's still an enforcement mechanism on the other side, and a corporation cannot put me in jail. But that's not to say that the corporations don't really have a huge say when it comes to decision-making processes. And I think that we should stop with that. Jeremy, I think, was actually explaining that as well, just to some extent. And his question was so on point, asking, well, what happens next? If nation states are no longer the ones that are in power on the top of our hierarchy system, then what follows? That was a great question. So if anybody from the audience has any answers to that, or any ideas, or would like to elaborate, feel free to point out into whatever directions we should actually investigate further.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that, the nation state is losing its relevance. But from a transitionary perspective, and I would love the nation state to lose its relevance, right? So I want to make that really clear. I'm a no borders person. Yeah, I'm about no borders. We're human beings. We're all sharing this one planet. We could have functional borders for administrative purposes and to help with taking care of stuff within certain boundaries. But the fact that the boundaries can keep us out, or stop us from having certain rights and privileges in different places, I just think the idea of that, is of yesteryear. That said, though, the nation state gives the power to the legal system. So the laws come through the process that is constitutionalized in a nation state, right? And so, if we want to create certain changes, and I think Jeremy and I, clash a little bit on that, because, Jeremy is saying, well, these corporations need to do more, and his focus was more on the self-regulation part because of all the power that they have. But I'm like, we can create laws that curtail what these transnational companies can do. And it comes into your sphere as well, because I know you did a lot of work around global. I see somebody giving us around, regulating in the global arena, because this is where the transnationals dance and operate, right? Between the laws of nation states. And we need to have this sort of we call it supranational or international framework that catches what they do. But in current systems, in order for us to get there, nation states have to pass the laws and make the decisions, that will create the container,
What you just described actually kind of answers the question, or it's not really the question, the statement that was made on the comment, but the lawmakers are directed by the transnationals. It's not really like that. Quite often, especially, for example, in the European Union, you would have a directive coming from the UN. It would need to be implemented by the nation state. And how it's being implemented, it can actually go not against the directive, not against what is being promulgated on the transnational level, but it could go into such details that it doesn't look at all like the text that actually was proposed by the directive. So it's still the case where nation states actually have quite a lot of sovereignty or independency when it comes to just how their laws are going to be looking like. And sure, we do want to have some sort of a unity or unification on a global level, but we're far from that. And I actually believe it's because of the social structures that we have. What you mentioned before, Margaret, I mean, think about it. Before in history, how laws were promulgated or how they were actually, abided by the whole societies, because people made rituals and because people were actually making poetry or songs about whatever was kind of accepted as a rule. And then we had the written word, and everybody was spreading these texts around on a paper and stuff like that, and the books, of course. And that changes severely. And today we have official gazettes, but just last year when we had this project, the GCPR, when we tried to compose, and we actually had composed a database of all the policies that countries around the world were promulgating because of the COVID situation, we found a couple of things. First is that there is no official gazettes on a global level whatsoever. Does not exist. We were pretty much the first ones that were really trying to do so collaboratively with all the legal professionals. And then the second one was that it's quite hard to really find out where the laws are being promulgated and how to access those databases. Sometimes it would literally happen on Twitter and on TV. And it's basically because that's the medium that we all are checking. So if we want the whole society to embody the rules that we as a society are expecting or accepting, then we need to choose the right medium. Apparently, TV and Twitter have many more followers than the official gazettes. It's clear to me that that's actually the case.
Yeah, but I want to come back to this point that the person seems to be anonymous, so I can't call their name, that is raising about transnational corporations where the power is at. They choose the governments, the lawmakers are directed by transnationals, and then you gave the European position, and they are saying that's from a European position. That's not the case in the global South. And I really get the point that they're trying to make, that in the global South, where in some countries, so I don't want to make a general statement across the board, in some countries in the global South that are newer democracies, and the state mechanisms and the parliamentary systems are not as robust as you would find in European countries that have hundreds of years of culture and progress going on there. You find these kinds of states are weaker and therefore more able to be subverted and influenced and more vulnerable to the influence of the transnational corporations. And that's why I think it's so important, the work that we are trying to do, and that we hope those of you who are plugging in and listening to us will join and come, and let's see how we can do this. It's professionals within these jurisdictions. You have a certain amount of power. We have a certain amount of power within our democratic systems, and we are not really using the power that we have in our democratic systems to start holding the companies that are operating within our jurisdictions to account, to start holding our government officials to account. And so it's about how do we show up as professionals. If we think our governments are hijacked by transnational power, how do we show up in our jurisdiction? Because at the end of the day, there will be some legal framework in place. The legal framework may be ineffective, but there may be some legal framework in place that you can start to utilize to raise your voice, to create action, to create change in a legal way. And this is a law and policy perspective. And this is what we are trying to support and help you to do wherever you are in the world, to access those avenues. So, for example, a lot of people don't know that on their books, there will be an avenue. In many democracies, there's an avenue for citizens to write a law, write a draft bill, and for citizen-led legal reform, take it to your parliament, and there's a way to get it through. And so it's about researching what are the mechanisms, the democratic mechanisms in your country that you can access. Over 100 and something countries all over the world right now have freedom of information legislation. And so that's another avenue that you can use and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I agree that transnationals definitely have a lot of power, and it is, as Jeremy was saying, probably the biggest elephant in the room right now that we have to face if we're thinking about system change.
What I would like to see, I mean, as well, because I hear you. I don't know how it looks like on the global south. I know how it looks like in Slovenia. We only have 2 million. We are a very, very small country, like compared to Trinidad and Tobago.
We're smaller.
You're even smaller, yeah.
1.3.
So what I was trying to say is that being such a small country, even though we do have a vote in European Union, even though we do have a vote and seat at the United Nations, it's still like we don't really have that much of an economic impact, for example. And our vote or our voice on the international level does not really count as much as, for example, the Germany's. But that to be said, I mean, what is interesting to me to observe is that we quite often wait and see what, for example, our neighboring countries are passing as the laws, and what, for example, their regulators are actually doing, and then we're copy-pasting it. And everybody knows it. And it's so funny because when I'm talking to, for example, our Austrian neighbors, what they're saying to me is that, sure, they are doing the same. They're copy-pasting the German laws. So we're copying from Austrians, and Austrians are copying from the Germans. And it's a pattern that I've been looking at, and we've all observed before in the past. My country is now old 30 years, so it's fresh new, basically. But that has been happening for a while. The only difference right now that we are having, and I think here I really have high hopes, is the technology and how it can actually help us recognize those patterns. I do believe that to some extent the regulators are kind of looking away when they hear or see that happening, because that's just the path that everybody taught them, or that's something that can be argued functioned in the past. And there's nothing bad about it if we're copy pasting, or if we're just waiting for the transnational decision to be made and then applying the laws that are aligned to whatever has been proclaimed on the transnational level. But I mean, I think that if we're having these types of patterns in place, we should be mindful of them, or at least we should actually use them to the benefit of everybody, or at least however the laws are being made, let's really find out what those patterns are and then investigate whether this is indeed the most effective way of promulgating and creating the laws. Because to some extent, I do believe that once we see these patterns, once we try to adopt technology to a bit of a better extent, higher extent, we're going to see that there's more room to improve. There is actually conversations that could be happening cross borders, not just with the neighbors, but perhaps with a country like Trinidad, or a country in, South Africa, for example, that also is looking into the same domain and has been regulating a specific sector. And then the Slovenian regulator says, oh, well, we should actually use the same. Yeah. We shouldn't be waiting for the Austrians to do the same. No, we already have jurisdictions around the world that have been doing that because they had the same need as we do right now. So I think this is going to be happening more and more often, but we are on the verge. I mean, we only started, to be honest. computers have been, generated like just a couple of decades ago. And it will be possibly more and more generations to come before we even get to that point. But yeah, I mean, alongside, we're going to be creating or becoming even more so of a, what do we call it, global citizen?
Yeah.
Cosmopolitan citizen.
Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think we need to have these action research and learning communities of practice where we can come together across borders, right? That is one of the key things. Across jurisdictions, we come together and we start, looking at the different policies that are in particular niches taking place, and seeing what we can learn and how we can cross-fertilize and how we can share expertise, across the boundaries. And that's the exciting part of the work that we're doing, and this, one report that we just did was taken up by the UN, and, everyone got these certificates. We're like, wow, we get a certificate for our paper. Okay, good, thanks. But yeah, it was about crisis provisions, crisis procurement provisions in international trade. And, we use the knowledge from all of the people, all the lawyers and researchers around the world who are building this COVID-19 database to do that. And so there are things that we can do. And that's the reason why we're having these conversations, guys, so that those of you who are feeling, oh my God, what's going on in this world? We're so frustrated. We don't know how to make change and make it work. And you're just fed up with the governments and how the government is acting. We really, hi Kurt, how you going? Yeah, it's about, becoming a part of a community that actually has hope. We take action and we are hopeful in the work that we are doing, that we will, be able to influence law and policy in local jurisdictions. Yeah, so that was a little snippet of the conversation with Jeremy Lent. And let me tell you all something. That conversation had some fiery parts in it, because what was really cool about it was, we all have respect for each other. The three of us, was Anja, myself, and Jeremy Lent. We do have a lot of respect for each other. And so we were able to say things that, with grace. And so there were clashes, because I remember at one point, Anja and Jeremy were saying, yes, all we have to do is, work together and dance together and like an orchestra.
I remember that.
Yeah, and I was hearing the violin going, and, guys, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm from the African diaspora. And I don't think that if my forefathers had adopted that approach, let's dance and let's play and be kind with the slave master and all of that, that I would be sitting here today. So I have to honor the work that has been done to help us to be where we are today. And I think that if we're thinking about system change, there's not just one way for us to do and be. Some people may have to be a force. Some people may have to be a receptor. Some people may have to dance. Some people may have to fight. And it's just for each of us to try to figure out what is our role in the shift? What is our agency in this shift that's taking place in the world? Wherever you are, you don't have to be a lawyer, don't have to be an accountant or any kind of, whatever you are doing, what is your sphere of influence from a citizen perspective? As a citizen in your community, what is your sphere of influence, and how can you go about using that sphere of influence to create positive change? So yeah, I think we've been at it for a little while. Anja, what do you think?
I still think it's about the dance. I can't get rid of that thought. I kind of have a feeling that even when we call it a fight, it's a form of a dance with aggressive moves.
Okay. All right, I'll give you all that then. We have to dance aggressively then. Okay. All right. But aggression and force.
Yeah, I think it was
applied at some point. Yeah.
I think it was more or less just the allegory for or analogy for making sure that we talk about the steps that we recognize what steps needs to be taken, what the next steps are going to be, what's the rhythm, for example. But yeah, it's a bit broader. I don't know. I would still go down that path.
All of you
but
will. Right. So all of y'all. But maybe those of you plugging in and listening right now, you all could tell us what you all think. I mean, if we're thinking about system change, you know, is it all going to be peaceful and harmonious and like a dance? Is system change going to be like a dance? You know? Yeah, you all let us know.
This is a really broad question. I mean, we might be asking how the Third World War is going to look like as well.
Oh God.
It's a legit question.
Yeah.
It's human nature to have arguments and to have disputes and to try to manage them. And I don't think that we have actually reached a point where we collectively and globally know how to actually manage disputes in a peaceful way. At least up until today, we haven't really seen that happening universally. Let's see.
Yeah, that opens up a whole other kind of world. Just what is peace and what is
this
peaceful?
is us.
Because
we
peace
started
without justice. Because peace without justice is not peace. But all right, we're gonna. You know what? We could have a conversation about this, Anja. We really should. You know, because I think it is important for us to figure out how do we come together and solve problems together. And you know, as a Caribbean person, you know, doing a lot of work in Europe and in European spaces right now, yeah, I hear that this is how we need to be, and we need to be this peaceful kind of way. But then if that is how I was, and I was going along with everything, I mean, I don't know how. Yeah, I mean, it's a work in progress for me, and yeah. So I'm not saying anything definitive, but I know that I show up in a way that sometimes can be confrontational, right? And can be confronting, not confrontational, because I'm not confrontational, but it can be confronting, right? Because I don't always share the same views. We have someone talking, and why aren't we seeing who it is anymore? Has some setting changed that has... Right. This will be the last comment we look at and we chat about and all of that. I like the idea, but I think that our role as professionals should be twofold. Look for the legal avenues, but also create spaces that center ordinary people who lack the influence, but have thoughts, ideas, and are the ones most impacted by bad and corrupt policies the most. Absolutely. I don't know why I'm not seeing your name, Facebook user.
But yeah, we totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can we quote though? I mean, we're going to be quoting anonymous people.
No, I think something went on with our settings that is making it, we're not able to access the person's name. We'll check that. But yeah, I think that's a great point for us to close off this conversation on. Or Danielle.
Danielle.
Big brain. Danielle Frederick. Agreed, 100%, right? And so, yeah, I think we've been at it for an hour, Anja. Hope you enjoyed the snippets of the conversation with Jeremy Lent that we shared. We were going to share a little more, but we saw you all weren't really engaged with just hearing the audio. We have the full audio visual conversation on flix.com. Check it out there, and we'll be sharing with you when that's available. What other announcements do we have to make? Join us this month. Yeah, join us for a masterclass with someone that I really, really admire. I love the fact that in my work, I am able right now to profile a lot of voices and experts from the Global South as well. And I'm really, really proud to partner with Renee Cummings. The Future Law Institute is partnering with Renee Cummings to put on this Designing for Algorithmic Justice Masterclass. Guys, come and check it out. Come and be a part of this conversation. It's on a Saturday. We have fun for 3 hours together. And then you join us in our WhatsApp group, you join us in our network communities of practice, where we do action research, and it's a learning community of practice in that particular area, where you figure out, what it is I want to learn, what is it I want to share and contribute contribute to knowledge building in, and then how do I leverage the resources that I'm gaining in this community that I'm a part of to pursue policy change in my local jurisdiction. So our community, guys, it's not for everybody. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Our community that we are building at Future Law Collaborative are for professionals who want to contribute to policy change in their jurisdictions, policy change that contributes to a safer, more just, more ecologically resilient future. And so thank you for tuning into this little conversation. We have lots of fascinating conversations coming up as well, with some other experts. And we love being able to bring these voices to you. We don't only need to listen to the opinions of Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Obama, and you know what I mean? These people are great, don't get me wrong, and they've done their stuff, but there's a whole segment of society with a lot of expertise and knowledge to share that we can. Yeah.
To Daniel's point, we are actually going to be bringing a lot of ordinary people, the usual mortals, so including ourselves, together at the end of March, because we are looking into having these quarterly meetings for the whole collaborative. We're going to be launching a fresh new website for the membership and collaborative efforts.
We're working on
keep an eye, as we speak, literally. So keep an eye on the inbox. We're going to be sending you an invite over the email. And yes, absolutely invited to join us, because we are looking into how do we share the ideas with each other, how do we just exchange these thoughts, how we might even create the thought experiments around these topics that usually don't really reach us, because there's so many different specialized people that we can just tap into with a conversation with. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for joining, guys. See you all at the masterclass. See you all on the inside of Conversations. Bye.
Enjoy.